Welcome to my New Dimensions YouTube channel. Your host is Michael Mansa Liova to take you through risk management. Many ideas float in people's minds whenever they hear the word risk. We want to navigate through this particular maze and try to demystify this word risk in people's minds. Therefore, we want to attempt to answer the question, what is risk? A number of references can be made in trying to attempting to explain the risk. For Knight Frank, he's claimed that risk can be taken to be measurable uncertainty. In his explanation, he tried to think about risk, uncertainty, and profit. When you look at risk in relation to uncertainty, one will say, what is a risk? Is that whose probability can be determined, or whose likelihood can be measured, whereas uncertainty is revealing something that might happen or may not happen, whose likelihood cannot be determined or measured. So that's what Knight Frank thought about risk. Now, in looking at risk, one cannot forget to say that in most cases, you find that risk can be related to return. There is a return trade-off that can be considered in this particular regard. You find that in most situations, where there is high return, is normally associated with high risk. So that is normally the case in nature when we start talking about risk. We can also look at what ISO or IEC Guide number 51 of 1999 says about risk. It says that risk can be taken to be a combination of probability of occurrence of harm and the severity of that harm. Again, that is what can be said about risk. Furthermore, we find this to be in ISO or IEC Guide number 73 of 2002, where risk is taken to be combination of the probability of an event and its consequences. In other cases, we have risk being taken to be the chance of something happening that will have an impact on objectives. ISO 31000 of 2009 states that risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. So we have various connotations about risk, just to give you an insight of how varied the expression of risk can be, but pointing to one and the same thing. We want to also ask a question or answer the question, why incur risk? Why incur risk? We incur risk in a process, accept and manage risk effectively to ensure short and long-term profitability. In our day-to-day activities, we incur risk, and this risk then require us to have controlled risk taking to provide a source of competitive advantage. As I've already said, the greater is risk, the greater the reward. It is taken that returns tend to be higher on riskier projects. As we incur risk, note that the rewards may be financial in nature, e.g. increased profits or decreased costs, or may be intangible such as a better quality better quality information or increased innovation. So you find that to have this, there's a measure of risk that we have to bear or we have to incur. We have to incur risk to secure success. Why manage risk then? Risk is taken to be one that affects or reduces the value as well as limit the welfare of any community, any organization, by limiting the management's ability to achieve its objectives. Risk management then tries to limit this reduction in value and welfare, thereby, in so doing, risk management increases business value. We have to also talk about risk management responsibility. Why take on the responsibility of risk management? The following can be some of the reasons why risk management responsibility is shouldered. One can be that risk can adversely affect the achievement of entities' objectives. So if it's not well managed, the entity can be adversely affected. Secondly, by reducing the likelihood of an event or its potential impact, the risk is managed. Okay? Thirdly, note that managing risk is a key management responsibility, and an effective risk management system lies at the pedestal or is the fundamental requirement of the best practice corporate governance. Requirement of best practice corporate governance. So that's why risk management should be shouldered. Risk management is done systematically through a process. So we can talk about a risk management process. What is this risk management process? Risk management process can be taken to be a systematic application of management policies, procedures, and practices to the task of communication, consultation, establishing the context, identifying, analyzing, evaluating, treating, monitoring, and reviewing risks This definition is according to ISO 3100. So when you talk about a process, it is depiction of an interlink of closely connected activities which happen in a series to achieve a desired result. So risk management is a product or is evidence of such type of well-coordinated activities to achieve desired result. Mainly, an entity achieving its desired objectives. That is what risk management brings to the fore. I want to look at some notable features of this definition. An in-depth analysis of this definition. What should we take home? Having looked at this definition of risk management process as given by ISO 3100, a number of points can be noted. One, that risk management is a dynamic process, not a checklist. So meaning, because the events or the circumstances keep on evolving and changing over time, you don't expect the same type of structured risk management system to be at play. It will always be adjusted to answer to the new challenges. So it's not a checklist whereby the items are cast in stones and you keep on referring to the same things. Not at all. Secondly, you talk about risk management process involves matching the actual risk taken by the firm to the risk that the firm believes it should be taking. Okay? So what happens in this particular case? You might make reference to an entity's tolerable levels. Okay? The levels at which certain aspects or risk elements are accepted or can be contained, and look at what has actually happened. We also look at risk management should be embedded in all the organization's practices and processes in a way that is relevant, effective, and efficient. You cannot talk about a piecemeal application of risk management. Then the whole system will be watered down. It will be rendered ineffective. At every level of the entity, there should be good practices that are being followed with regard to risk management. So it should be affecting the entire organization structure, the entire organization system, for the system as a whole and the entity as a whole to benefit. Therefore, in emphasis, it can be said that risk management process should become part of and not separate from those organizational processes. So these are most notable features or elements of the definition relating to risk management process. Approaches to managing risks. The committee or sponsoring organization, the Enterprise Risk Management Framework, is one of the approaches that can be followed in risk management. We also have a CIMA risk management cycle that can also be adopted. These two are not exhaustive of the approaches that are available in the world, but I just thought of making mention for you to maybe easily follow through and make reference to these particular approaches. Let's look at the Enterprise Risk Management Framework implementation flow. How is the risk management process done? Where does it start from? Where does it end? How is it rejuvenated? How is it strengthened? How does it answer to modern challenges? So there is a structured process that is followed, which can be aptly be demonstrated by this Enterprise Risk Management Framework implementation flow chart. So risk management starts with risk management planning. You plan by setting out or answering the question, what are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to achieve? Will be the buzz question at this particular point. So when you decide on the objectives or what you want to achieve, then you now set up the milestones for us to achieve what you have set. How do we reach there? So which milestones should be covered or taken? So you come up with objectives. So that is objective setting. So that's how you kind of lay a ladder and put up rungs so that as you climb the ladder, you'll be growing closer and closer to achieving the end, your set objectives. So you have decided how you are going to end at the other end. Now, as you set out the ladder in form of objectives, therefore you have decided how you are going to reach to the other end, then you have to find out what is it that can prevent you from reaching the other end. You have to find those or identify those things that will hinder your progress. Find them. That is risk identification. That would be risk identification. So under risk identification, you are basically trying to answer the question, what might affect our chances of meeting our objectives. So in the process, you have to find those which might prevent you from reaching your objectives. Okay? So normally in an organization, this can be done by, in most cases, brainstorming. You come up with people just throwing in what they think might prevent their achieving the desired results, and document these particular items in a risk register. Okay, you have identified these risks. So if you don't document them, it's very easy to review them and see how these risks can be mitigated. That's how it is. So the other thing that you need to look at is trying to answer the question, which of those things that might affect us are most important. So remember, in risk identification, maybe by way of brainstorming, people just throw in anything that they think might affect the chances of the entity achieving its set objectives. Now, not every item that is thrown into the kitty or the basket is of equal weight in importance. So you have to prioritize these particular identified risks in terms of which one are most important, which are most impactful. Okay? So you do that by risk assessment. You also do that through risk evaluation. You also do that through risk analysis. The analysis can be by way of qualitative approach or quantitative approach. Qualitative approach is akin to sifting through the collection or basket of identified risks and giving you suggested value to each particular risk, or giving your substantive, or indeed giving your best judgment as to what is more important than the other. Okay, so that is what qualitative risk is. Now, when you are using qualitative risk approach, your decisions can be subjective. So it depends on who is making this analysis. So this is basically sifting through the basket of risk identifying. We also look at another analysis which is quantitative in nature. Whatever is quantitative is one that can be measurable. Okay, so you use mathematical models to come up with some measures that will help you prioritize these particular risks. Why is it important to analyze risk in the order of importance, for instance? This is because there is the need to allocate resources, more resources to high risk areas, less resources to low risk areas. So in so doing, we are trying to rationalize our resource basket and efficiently implement our mitigating or risk treatment measures. So once we have carried out an analysis by sifting and measuring, we now have to make a decision. The decision which will be bordering on how do we respond to these risks whose assessment, analysis, and evaluation has been carried on. There are a number of responses which we call risk treatment that can be used. In this particular case, we can think of avoiding risk altogether. We can think of reduction of the risk. We can think of sharing the risk. We can think of accepting the risk. So these are the possible treatment or responses to the analyzed risks, assessed risks, evaluated risks. Once the decision has been made as how we are going to treat the risk, the next thing is carry out or check the implementation, and we monitor the risk and carry out controls so that we make sure that we remain within our desired track. So this involves acting and measuring. So acting, where we respond to certain departures and take corrective action so that we remain on course. Measurement, we find out whether the departure is beyond tolerable levels, therefore requires our action, or within tolerable levels, so we just accept it and manage it like that. Because not every aspect can be responded to. Remember, the resources are scarce relative to demand. So once we have the monitoring and control aspect, in so doing, it can also assist us to identify new risks. Because when we monitor the situation, as I said, risk management is dynamic because the environment keeps on changing. So you might find that the control activities that could have been put in place are no longer effective, so they need adjustment or improvement. So when we monitor again, we might discover that there are other risks which were not envisaged at the beginning or at the planning stage. So these are newly identified risks that need to be taken on board. So that's what risk monitoring and control can bring about. So that's what the enterprise risk management framework implementation flow looks like. And that is the kind of explanation that goes with it. We also look at the risk management cycle as given by CIMA. So under this cycle, CIMA's risk management cycle, we are given that the first thing you do is establish risk management group and set goals. So you see the parallels between the enterprise risk management framework and the CIMA's risk management cycle. So here we start with establish risk management group and set goals. Here on the ERM, we are talking about risk management planning. So once the establishment of risk management group and goals are set, then we have an impact of this particular group in the sense that it facilitates the identification of risk areas. So once the risk areas have been identified, in trying to answer what might affect us, we need to analyze, meaning under CIMA's risk management cycle, we need to understand and assess the scale of the risk. To what extent are we likely to be impacted? What is the significance of this particular risk? So we are trying to understand and assess the scale of risk. Now, as in so doing, this information should filter through to inform information for decision making. Once we have understood, as the case was with ERM, where we understand through qualitative risk analysis and quantitative risk analysis The next stage is where we look at decide what action. So in this particular case, after understanding for CIMA's risk management cycle, we need to think about how do we develop the risk response strategy. As I said, looking at the risks identified and analyzed, we can either accept, or we can reduce, or we can share, or we can avoid the risk. Again, this information informs the information for decision making. Once the decision has been made, or once we have developed the risk response strategy, the next thing we need to look at is implement the strategy. We pick the strategy and implement that strategy and allocate the responsibilities. So who is in charge? Who is accountable? Again, this should be informing the information for decision making. Upon the implementation strategy put in gear and the resources allocated, the implementation and monitoring of controls sets off. Under ERIM, we had risk monitoring and control. So through that, the control system or mechanism will review and refine the process and do it again where need be. So it can assist, as I said, in identifying new risks, okay, which are under ERIM from number 6, it feeds into number 2, risk identification. So that's how CIMA's risk management cycle operates, or illustrate what risk management process is all about. The responses I've made mention of can be aptly looked at from the point of view of Tara response matrix, where you look at the probability of occurrence as either being high or low, and the impact or the consequence also as being high or low. Okay, when the probability of risk is high, okay, and the impact or consequence is high, then better avoid that risk. When the probability of that risk is low, but the impact or consequence is low, or is high rather, then better transfer that risk. So that's what this matrix is showing us. If the probability of risk occurring is high, but the impact or consequence is low, then better reduce the risk. If the probability of occurrence of a risk is low and the impact is also low, better accept that risk. So what do I mean by accepting the risk? By transferring the risk, avoiding the risk, reduce the risk. The potential responses, what they mean is, for transfer, it means that where possible, share or transfer to others, e.g. insurance company. Take an insurance policy. So that will tell you to take an insurance policy. Where you are guided to say it's better avoid, what does it mean? It simply means risks that are highly likely and have high adverse consequences should be avoided where possible. So don't take that particular activity. Avoid taking that activity. Okay? Because it can have dire consequences for the entity. It might spell the end of the entity once that particular unfortunate thing takes off or happens. What of where you are guided to reduce the risk? This refers to methods to reduce the impact or likelihood of these risks. So you come up with mitigation strategies. What of where you are guided to say accept this risk? In this case, this is an appropriate response to small, low impact, low likelihood risks, where the cost benefit exercise has shown that active management of these factors is not worthwhile. So you just let it be. If it happens, because the consequence or impact is very low. So that's how you look at these consequences. Now, when it comes to risk assessment, a number of things need to be looked at, okay, or be considered. Under risk assessment, you may consider risk mapping, which is a way to analyze and evaluate risks and formulate responses, appropriate responses. For risks that are deemed to be highly probable with high impact, these will become a priority, and these need urgent attention or immediate action in order to manage the risk. Because they have a high impact, it might spell the doom of the organization. So since you want to guarantee continuity, move fast to work on these kind of risks. They are high impact. Then risks which are high probability but low impact need to be monitored by the entity, okay, and need to prepare to meet the change. For low probability high impact combination that need to be considered, at the very least a contingency plan should be put in place or in motion. So that is what needs to be considered around risk assessment. So now we also need to look at risk management strategy process. As I've already mentioned, when it comes to a process, you are talking about related, interlinked activities that flow from an organization or entity to achieve specified objectives. So for risk management strategy and process, this can be depicted by this diagrammatic presentation, where what you need to look at when you're analyzing, you are doing the risk management and coming up with the strategy, you start by analyzing the current performance. So you do a review of the current performance, and also to what do you need to do so that you know the strengths and weaknesses of the current process. The knowledge is better acquired also by analyzing market forecasts, okay, so that you can see where you are going in terms of market. And in looking at the market forecast, you start looking at what can prevent you, okay, from hitting your targets in your plans or in your projections, in your forecast. And then also assess the risk. Analyze them in terms of which one are more impactful than the others. Okay, which one are more impactful than the others. We also look at this particular process and look at what initiatives can be developed and what resources can be marshaled around, so that these resources can help us assess risks further, look at combinations, okay, of these risks. Mind you, when you are talking about risks, risk can be both in terms of opportunities and threats. So look at this combination of opportunity and threats and agree on a plan, and better be in a position to develop a contingency where need be. Then when you do that, because you have known the interventions that are required in your plan, develop the base budget and develop the initiative budget. Once you have done that, you have put your values on paper as to what is required amount, then come up with a funding plan. How are these particular budgets going to be financed? So that leads into our initiating of the projects, such as making us be able to carry out forecast sales for our project, forecast costs for our project, forecast initiative status for our project, forecast strategic outcomes, which are the flagships of our projects, strategic outcomes. In so doing, make sure that we measure initiative progress, so there should be quantifiable, possibly. Measure strategic success. We should be able to come up with milestones to show whether we are actually trending towards achieving the complete success. We measure financial performance. We can do that through ratio analysis, which are indicative of whether we are getting better or getting worse off. In all this, make sure that what we are monitoring is reported or documented. So we need to report current and forecast status. We also need to monitor risks or indeed assumptions. Look at assumptions. Are they still valid, or are the risks changing? Because the risks are dynamic, could be dynamic, looking at the environment which keeps on changing. So what can be done about that once we have made some monitoring activity, carried out some monitoring activity and found out that risks are changing or assumptions needs to be changed for us to succeed. So once that is done, and those particular changes or departures are significant, that will call for an adjustment of the plan. So we adjust the plan by actually making new assessment of risks, and we are supposed to also evaluate the options and again develop these contingency plans. That's the adjustment we are looking at. So it goes back to feed into development of a contingency plan. So that's how risk management and strategy process works out. We can also talk about risk management plan or process. Normally, it all starts with the communication and consultation. Look at the stakeholders, identify them, those who are primary stakeholders and secondary stakeholders, consult them. Once consultations are complete, establish the context. Establish the context in trying to answer the question, what do we need to take into account and what are our objectives? So once we know we have set our objectives in this particular case, we go and look at what can endanger our success, preventing us from achieving those objectives. So you identify risks. In short, you are trying to answer the question, what might happen, how, when, and why. We need to analyze the risks. As I already said, under CIMA risk management cycle, there was the aspect of looking at quantitative analysis. Is it not under CIMA but under ERM? Quantitative analysis and qualitative analysis. So you look at that in trying to answer what will this mean for our objectives. How impacted will they be should that particular event occur or not occur? We evaluate the risks. When evaluating, you are trying to answer the question, in what order should we deal with them? So once we have arrived at this point, we have to make a decision of how do we treat risks. Do we avoid them? Do we accept them? Do we reduce them? Do we share them? You answered the question, how should we deal with them? In all this, there should be continuous monitoring and review so that we are in a know as to whether the risks and controls have changed. So this is the risk management process. Thank you for listening to my YouTube presentation. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also like my channel. Until then, bye for now.